everyone, and it's good to see you all come together in these virtual times and join us from your respective locations. We welcome you to the Vedanta Knowledge Series, which aims at helping us maneuver these challenging times, understand our role and responsibility in the organization and the world, and envision a better future. It's a pleasure to have two of the industry stalwarts with us today. I welcome our senior advisors, Mr. R. Gopalan and Mr. J.K. Dadu, to share their knowledge and perspective on building globally competitive manufacturing and reducing import dependence. I also welcome our colleague Dheeraj Nair, Director Economics and Policy, Vedanta, and Shumi Jain, Economist, Vedanta, to moderate today's session. To our audience members, I request you to mute your audio during the session. Please post your questions in the Q&A window only. You can share your comments in the chat box. Your questions will be put forward by the moderators on your behalf during the Q&A session in the end. And now I invite Dheeraj to inaugurate the session. Dheeraj.
Thank you, Suriti, and welcome all. Those of you who are on Zoom with us, and those of you who are on Workplace. This promises to be an interesting session with two of our senior advisors, both of whom are retired IAS officers. Mr. Gopalan from the 1976 batch and Mr. Dadu from the 1983 batch. Both have served in a number of distinguished positions over the years, but what is important in the context of this webinar is that both of them at different points in time have spent a long time in the Department of Commerce and are very, very familiar with the trade issues and the import-export issues, which are particularly relevant when we're talking about India at 75 and when we're talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think this is really a key subject, and we couldn't have two better informed people with us here. So thank you, sirs, for joining us, and thank you, Shumi, for co-moderating this. And I think we should get into the conversation straight away. And I urge you all of you who are listening, please put in your questions in Q&A or on Facebook, Workplace by Facebook, and we'll ask our two advisors to answer them. So Shumi, you can shoot with the first question.
Sure. Thanks, Dheeraj. Thank you, Mr. Dadu and Mr. Gopalan, for joining us. And as the context has been set, just to give the audience a more broader picture to understand this whole context, so what do you think is the nature of our import dependence, in terms of India, and which second part of the question being which products are we importing in big numbers? So just to set the context.
Shumi, unfortunately, India has had a trade dependence of a very large magnitude on a few products for several years. I tried to dig out the figures for 2019 and 20, and when I reel out some of the top 15 products which we import, you will get a sense of what I'm saying. Crude oil imports lead the table at $102 billion. Now, Vedanta has an excellent opportunity to do import substitution here as our production levels increase. The second most important item you'll be surprised to know is raw gold, $28 billion. The third item, again, is something that we can't do without. Those are rough diamonds, because we export a large quantity of polished diamonds, so we need the raw material for that. That's about $12.6 billion. Then we need steam coal for our plants, and that's about $9.3 billion. Coking coal is about $8.6 billion. LNG, again a vital import, is $9.6 billion. Cut and polished diamonds, which we further polish, is about $7.9 billion. And then we move down to other raw materials like mobile phone parts, $7.2 billion. Aeroplane and aircraft parts, $4.8 billion. PCBs, a little less at $0.7 billion. Crude palm oil, we import large quantities in terms of $3.6 billion. Computer parts, about $3 billion. Solar cells, since we are on a rampage with respect to solar power generation, it's about $1.6 billion today. And silver, which is another opportunity for Vedanta to ensure import substitution, is approximately $2.4 billion. Now, these are the top 15 items that we import. And out of these 15, I can clearly say that 7 of these items, that is crude oil, gold, mobile phone parts, PCBs, crude palm oil, computer parts, solar cells, and silver, these are 7 clear opportunities for us to do import substitution if we can build our internal strengths. So to answer your question, we are importing about half our main items to re-export, because you can't do without the concerned inputs to be brought in before you add value add there. And another 7 odd items are clear import substitution possibilities in the long run. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Dadu, for that, all that data, because I think data is really what tells us the reality. Mr. Gopalan, fundamentally, it's a reality, and we know that we are vulnerable to imports. I mean, we've consistently had a trade deficit over the years. This also suggests to me that somewhere domestic industry in India is not competitive. In fact, you would know that, all of you would know that the share of manufacturing in GDP has been falling over the last decade. Why is this so, Mr. Gopal? And what?
Well, the competitiveness in manufacturing is not only competitiveness, lack of competitiveness manufacturing alone. There is an attendant lack of competitiveness in services as well. Now, these two things combine together to reduce the competitiveness of manufacturing. We find that, if you look into the ICOR numbers, Dheeraj, over a period of time, you will find that ICOR numbers have been very unfavorable to services the last about 7 to 8 years. And in manufacturing, the last 4 to 5 years, the ICOR in manufacturing has been very, very bad. Now, this shows clearly that we are losing on productivity front, and therefore that reflects in the lack of competitiveness. Other thing is, there are many other factors which contribute to the competitiveness decrease. Factor cost increase is one which all of us know, the land prices, the labor costs, then all of them lead to uncertainty in the way investors can take for granted certain things. They are not in a position to take for granted many things. Uncertainty is another thing which is killing them. Now, exchange rate is another area where we have been finding this not very helpful for exports and also to our competitiveness. R&D, if you find as a percentage of GDP, it is very, very stationary. And if you look at the number of patents we have obtained over a period of time as compared to comparable countries, we are not in, we have to improve quite a lot. We have, taxation issues which creates some amount of uncertainty, and if taxation is to be, the regime needs to be stable over a period of time, this uncertainty can get removed. Financial intermediation costs, once again, is another area where people find costs being pretty high compared to comparable countries. You look at the ease of doing business, you find that people, though we may improve in order in World Bank rankings with Delhi and Mumbai, but you look at the ease of doing business index as drafted by our Niti Aayog, you will find that we have a lot more to do to catch up. And look at archaic laws in this country, which once again adds on to costs. For instance, if you look at the model standing orders, which is something which manufacturing industries have to adhere to, there are such strange things like size of windows and those kind of things, which I think people can do away with. And this create a very good excuse for inspectors to come and extract whatever they have got to, and ensure that people are not able to focus on the core business, which is what they should do to improve the competitiveness. You can keep on adding a list of things, a lot of things to this, but I thought this would be immediately in a position to catch up with. And there are ways to handle them as we go along, we'll discuss. But these are basically reasons why we have decline in competitiveness in both in manufacturing and services, and one feeds into the other.
Thank you, Mr. Gopalan. Mr. Dadu, we know that there are certain issues which Mr. Gopalan highlighted with our competitiveness. One of the things India did in the last decade was that we signed many free trade agreements, regional free trade agreements with ASEAN, Japan, Korea. Now, one reason could be that we hope that by opening our borders, we will become more competitiveness. But the evidence we see is that the growth in imports from these countries has far exceeded the growth in exports. So could you just give us a bit of background on what was the thinking behind signing these free trade agreements, and why they haven't worked in our favor?
A very good question. The regime of free trade agreements started somewhere around 2005, 2006, when we picked up ASEAN, Japan, and Korea, because we felt that these were progressive countries. We could export a lot to them and could buy a lot of stuff from them. But please understand, a free trade agreement involves nitty-gritty negotiation on tariff lines. So when government negotiators on both sides sit to discuss this, they expect a lot of background material and support data from trade and industry. And therefore, FICCI, ASSOCHAM, CII play a very important role. Now, obviously, the same thing happens on the side of the other countries also. Now, I have done FTA negotiations with Australia and New Zealand, and I have seen how well prepared they are on every tariff line when they come and discuss with us. Unfortunately, in our system, when the government negotiators go there or have a session here, the amount of background data which will facilitate an equitable negotiation is many a time missing. Because our trade and industry feels this is a negotiation which will have effect later, why should we worry about it now? Now, if you look at Japan and Korea, both were finalized in 2011. In 2011, many of the items in which we agreed to reduce import duties from these countries, there was very little data provided by trade and industry to tell us whether we should go ahead or not. So if we did not have the requisite amount of material available with us, a lot of errors would have happened. Which is the reason why, if you look at Japan and Korea, the imports have far exceeded the exports we made to these two countries. Similarly is the case with ASEAN. Now we are learning from these errors, and we are ensuring now that we will not do free trade agreements unless we are absolutely sure that the balance of trade does not go against us. I can give you an example of Australia and New Zealand. These were started in 2011-12. I was looking after this. And within a year or two, we realized that the balance of trade will go against us because we have very little to export to these tiny countries. And these countries can flood us with milk powder, with apples, with wine and lamb and things like that, which we consume in large quantities. And for the first time, Amul put its foot down and said, we will not allow milk powder imports into the country because we are self-sufficient. We are the largest country in terms of milk production. So the point I'm trying to emphasize is, and you take the example of Vedanta. Vedanta also at the time of ASEAN, Japan and Korea Free Trade Agreement settlement did not pose issues relating to zinc imports, relating to the other items that we deal with. If the adequate data at that time was not provided by the relevant sections of trade and industry to the negotiators, we are facing the consequences of that today. So the essence of what I'm trying to say is a free trade agreement should be started or initiated only when we are absolutely clear on what tariff lines we will agree to in terms of reduction of import duties, and why would we agree to this, and whether the local trade and industry has been taken into complete confidence, even in terms of their future expansion plans. Only then we should proceed. In the case of, as I mentioned, Australia and New Zealand, we jettisoned the FTA. And since 2012-13, we are in 2020, nothing has happened with respect to these two FTAs because we are absolutely sure it doesn't benefit us. So a cost-benefit analysis needs to be done each FTA before we proceed. We have done the same thing in the case of EU. We have not gone ahead with that because we realize it won't help us. So now, in hindsight, we have realized, and EU, Australia, and New Zealand are clear examples why we have not proceeded further on this. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, and just a quick follow-up to that. What do you think are the prospects of, once you've signed these, is there any prospect of getting any revisions in your view?
You see, the review mechanism is built into every FTA. But unfortunately, the review has to be both sides. The review agreement has to be both sides. So if today we tell Japan or Korea we will not allow this, then they will say, give us some other item. We can't agree on, it has to be a give and take. And if the give and take can work out, we can still find a mechanism to see that it hurts us less. But the negotiator has to be very skilled. He has to ensure that our interests are protected, and what he gives as a consequence is not as hurtful as what he takes.
Thank you, sir. Shomi?
Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Dadu, for the detailed understanding of the FTAs and how they really work. And it's not just that if we've signed an FTA, the deal is kind of made and we've solved all our problems, right? And moving on, as you were saying, about tariffs, we've been seeing news, and we know about China increasing tariffs, and US and China going into trade wars. Ever since then, there has been a little change of perception about China. And a lot of people in the post-COVID era have kind of suggested and have come up saying that could India be actually an alternate manufacturing hub for China? So, Mr. Gopalan, I would like to ask you that: do you really foresee that happening? India taking over or replacing China as the next manufacturing hub for Asia and going forward for the world, or do you think countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Indonesia, could kind of come in and steal the advantage away from us?
Well, I want to answer the previous question also a little bit. When we had this initial Singapore-SECA negotiation and ASEAN, well, our tariff rates were pretty high. So in any case, we had to give in to the tariff decrease, but corresponding services benefit which we were to get did not occur at all. In the negotiations, we could not get that. This is one area where if we had put our foot down and then said we need the access in services, if we had not done it, probably then we were facing problems in the goods side. Second, in many of these cases in FTAs, the subsidy element is something which is lurking. And though there are provisions in the agreements to look into subsidy issues, we generally end up not taking very active role in that. That's something which over a period of time we have experienced that, and that's a case which if we had corrected, probably something would have really happened. But what I meant was that if non-tariff barriers were also taken as part of negotiations, possibly something we would have achieved which we were not able to achieve. Third, in rules of origin, we had many issues. Probably as Mr. Dadu says, the interaction with the industry was not so extensive enough to get to know the nuances, in what way we could have been hurt by rules of origin, which I think was another area which we are finding it difficult even to renegotiate at this point. But coming to your major question on the China shifting of the production from China to other countries, well, I don't know how much production shift can take place. Thanks to the excellent supply lines which are built in China, the market which it has, and the way it is playing its role in the world area, I don't know how many industries would like to move out of China. A survey of the US companies, which was taken up for movement away from China, 20% of them said we would have additional facilities outside, but our major production center will remain in China. But be that as it may, we also find some industries, some areas are shifting. Vietnam, Bangladesh are major markets for that. We have got only, iPhone facility manufactured by Apple getting shifted partly into this country, or maybe an additional line is being established, so to say. What problem which we face compared to other countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh? Possibly the labor loss, the infrastructure costs, which are comparatively higher in India as compared to these countries. Availability of skilled labor. You look at Vietnam, you get the kind of skilled labor which is required for getting these industries across. We are not able to get that. The ease of doing business, including ports, the way the commercial contracts are being, put to test and then are, decided by the courts, verdict given by the court. These are some of the income tax benefits. Obviously, we have also given some income tax benefits recently for a relocation of businesses. And also people are asking, look, your domestic investors not investing in your country. So how do we get the confidence that we should come and invest into your country? So these are some of the arguments which are holding against us at this point in time. And unless we handle some of these things with purpose and with a sense of an attitude which we want to get all these things resolved, I think we have a problem. I also underlined certain reasons why competitiveness in manufacturing has declined in the country. Some of them have to be addressed. So it's a task. Don't expect many of them to shift. A few of them would, but because they think that they have to have alternate places in addition to China, thanks to if there is only one supplier, one place where the production takes place, if that gets into a problem, the entire industry gets into a problem. They want to have an alternate location for insurance purposes. Maybe we will get a few of them, but we have to do a lot of things to really enable flow or relocation, as I call it, of industries from China into India. A lot of things have to be.
Mr. Gopalan, just a quick follow-up.
Can I chip in on this? I have a couple of points to make on this.
Sure, please do.
See, my information is about 300 firms showed interest for relocating from China. 100 of them, according to the data that I have, showed interest in coming to India. I had checked with Secretary DPIIT, who has worked as Joint Secretary with me. He said that based on a committee set up by the Prime Minister's office, 10 industrial clusters were identified in the country where we would give them plug-in, plug-out facilities and try and motivate these people to come in. Now, he also said that Invest India, which is an arm of DPIIT, has been asked to coax these guys to come in. When I asked him what is the result in the last 6 months, he says COVID times are difficult, but some CMs have been very progressive and have been offering land, and some agreements have been signed. So the upshot of it is that 100 firms have shown interest. How many finally come in will depend on the ease of doing business that we provide. Please carry on.
Thank you, sir, for that update. Good to know that at least there is interest in India. Let's see how much of it materializes. I think, again, just following up very quickly with a point that both of you have made. So, Mr. Gopalan, it's said that countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh attract more manufacturing because they have preferential market access to important markets like the US and EU. Do you think going forward for India, it makes sense? Mr. Dadu clearly said EU doesn't make sense, but I'd also like to hear your view. What about an FTA with the US or with the EU or with advanced countries, do you think we would be in a better position to exploit those and attract global manufacturing here and prevent it from going to Vietnam and Bangladesh?
You must appreciate that Vietnam and Bangladesh are the LDCs when they started these negotiations, and they had LDC access on a large number of tariff lines, and they consolidated them further to improve the competitiveness on various cost-related issues and also the ease of doing business. They made that. In fact, you will be surprised to know that the labor laws in Bangladesh are as archaic as when Britain left the country. It has not improved the way we had got it improved over the years. So that's the kind of facility they have for in manufacturing, especially labor-intensive manufacturing. As far as FTAs are concerned, between if you look at USA, let me restrict myself to USA. I have different views on Europe, but on USA, what happens is that whatever you do, my view is that on certain manufacturing items, the costs of manufacturing in US is pretty high. Okay, but on technologically advanced items, we don't have that type of base in manufacturing in this country. So there is a possibility that we will have ingress into the US markets, provided the tariffs are low. In any case, tariffs in US are already low. To make it even lower, to gain that kind of an advantage, I think there will be definitely some advantage for our industries which are on the lower end of manufacturing, which is the labor-intensive manufacturing in products. But once again, the kind of standards which are put in there, we should be in a position to adhere to. So improving our standards of what we produce will be necessary to gain access into those markets, and we should be very careful to see that the rules of origin difficulties are not put into by the US in its negotiations. On services, yes, there will be definitely a good complementarity. We are in certain types of services where we are much better off, computer-related services and engineering services, and those kind of services we are much better, and we will have access to the US markets. US will have access to markets on other issues like artificial intelligence and those kind of issues, those kind of high-end technical services. They will have access into our markets, and as a result, obviously, the productivity in the country will certainly undergo a change, definitely. And I think that with US, there is a possibility that we can get a good deal as we go along. As far as Europe is concerned, well, Mr. Dadu has hinted the difficulties which we had in negotiating with Europe. The problem in Europe was that we were not able to get proper access into the services market. It was the kind of ingress which other countries, European countries, were given. That kind of an ingress, Europe is one common market even for services until Britain. It is available still. Of course, Britain is getting away due to Brexit, but that kind of an access is available. The other issues relating to your the PF and those kind of issues, for which we had a problem with Europe that continues. In standards, you will find that European market is far more restricted. There are regulations and there are standards. Standards are voluntary, and you will find in many areas in EU there are standards by regional areas put up. So the importers use those standards as the yardstick for import into the country, and those standards are pretty high, and therefore they go beyond whatever internationally accepted standards. So our products are finding it difficult to move into those markets for those products. Of course, there are other things like basmati rice, those kind of where we have a good ingress into the market. But this is as far as Europe is concerned. But we have some other issues on the wines and those kind of things which I suppose we should be in a position to overcome if we really seriously set our mind at giving an outcome.
So, Dalu sir, you had, when we started this conversation, you spoke about 10 to 15 main products, that India imports, right? So, do you believe that some of these sectors are strategic in nature, right? If you talk about oil, natural gas, gold, coal, right? So, do you think that, and the government must basically protect these imports because they are strategic in nature? If you want to think about defense as well. So, what is your take on that? And do natural resources also fit into this definition?
You see, first let me give you a general broad guideline and then I'll come to your specific question. Now, a lot of you may not be aware that we in India, we deal with 11,900 tariff lines when we talk of imports and exports. And in the last 5 years, to reduce our import dependence, we have increased import duty on 4,000 out of these 11,900 lines, which is approximately 33%. The broad sectors are textiles, engineering, chemicals, leather, electronics. Now, why and how have we done it? Because private sector has come forward with logical data and conclusions saying that if tariff lines are imposed on these products, India would benefit. And that's how 4,000 of these tariff lines have been protected in terms of domestic industry being able to come forward and do the needful. If you look at the trade defense measures or trade remedies, I'll give you some figures which I collected from the Commerce Ministry. In 2018-19, 3 trade defense measures were applied, that is anti-dumping duty, safeguard duty and CVD. 53 cases were cleared where domestic industry was protected as a result. If you look at 1920, because of COVID, a certain effect came in, but 26 cases gave protection to domestic industry. Unfortunately, 2021, only 2 cases have been cleared so far, but you'll be surprised to know that 66 cases have been filed and they are ongoing. The investigation is going on. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you look at the data purely on account of tariff protection, a lot has already been done, and a lot is being done to ensure that domestic industry gets protected. Now, coming to your specific question, you see, in the minerals and the metals sector, we have to show our complete self-sufficiency first. We have done it in zinc, we have done it in aluminium, we are doing it in copper, but in natural gas and petroleum, we still don't have sustainable supply lines. Otherwise, we won't have a huge crude oil import bill, as I mentioned, of $102 billion. If we can ensure stronger, sustainable supply lines in crude, we can easily replace this. If we can do this in gold and silver, gold, I gave you figures, approximately $28 billion. Silver was about $2.4 billion. Crude palm oil, why can't we produce more palm oil in this country? Ramdev has bought a palm oil factory and he says, I'll increase the production 10 times. The moment he does that, we will have no reason to import crude palm oil. Similarly, mobile phone parts, we are allowing so many mobile companies to come and manufacture here. This would not be required. So the point I'm trying to make is, if we make a concerted effort and look at just the top 15 imports, at least 7 of them, as I mentioned at the beginning, are amenable to clear import substitution with sustainable production lines. So therefore, a strategy, an import substitution strategy with required infrastructure, facilities and facilitation is required to ensure that we reduce our import dependence and we move towards a greater Atmanirbhar Bharat, a Bharat where we can clearly produce a lot of what we consume here.
Right. Absolutely, sir. I mean, even if you were to talk about the resources, right? I mean, there's no dearth of resources. 70% of our oil and gas is still unexplored. And, we have this more than $100 billion of import bill. So, as you were saying correctly, I mean, infrastructure, supply chains, and a lot of policy reforms are really meant to be, in place for a more self-sufficient and Atmanirbhar Bharat, especially in terms of natural resources.
Just to give you an indication, I had spoken to Joint Secretary Petroleum, Mr.
Amarnath.
Sorry?
Mr. Amarnath.
Mr. Amarnath. He succeeded me in Lakshadweep as administrator, so he's from my cadre. I spoke to him. He told me that sustainable supply lines in crude are still not there. That is why we are importing. Because if exploration and tapping of the kind of potential that you're talking about actually starts happening, we are clearly in for $102 billion saving on the import bill.
Indeed, a very important point there, Mr. Dadu. I already have 2 or 3, 4 questions from the audience, and before I get to them, and please, the rest of you watching, we have a large number watching on Facebook, Workplace by Facebook, so please do put in your questions there, and we'll just come to them in 2 minutes. But before that, and it's a question for you both. Both of you could answer this. One of the criticisms is of this import saving approach is that India has tried this since 1947 in one way or the other. Try and reduce imports, try and increase manufacturing, but it has not created a globally competitive industry or globally competitive supply chain within India. In your view, why do you think it will be different this time, the outcome, after we've taken these tariff measures and whatever other measures? Do you think it will be different? And if you think so, why do you think it will be different?
Dheeraj, there are 2 nuances to your question. One is reducing import dependence, and the other is creating an alternative flow of supply chain. Let me deal with the first part. In India, we have never created this kind of a momentum to reduce import dependence as has happened in the last few years. I'll give you some of the non-tariff barriers, about 10 of them, which have been enunciated and which have been operationalized in the last few years. First of all, if you look at regulatory measures, we have prohibited imports of items like milk products and e-cigarettes. Secondly, if you look at import licensing, we put import restrictions on 125 items in the last 5 years. Some of the big items I'll reel out: refined palm oil, pneumatic tires, power tillers, TV sets, agarbattis. There are import restrictions on 125 such items. Thirdly, we have put minimum import price on certain items where we are very strong, like cashew kernels, desiccated coconut. Thanks to important data coming from the trade and industry, we've been able to put a minimum import price to protect domestic industry. Fourthly, quotas. We have put quotas on pulses like tur, moong and urad. For the yellow pea, we have put a quota plus an MIP of 200 rupees per kilogram. We have also put port restrictions. For example, for cut flowers, since we are a large flower producing nation, on cut flowers we have said only Chennai will be allowed to import cut flowers. So this again is a non-tariff barrier. Then, as you know, we have created a steel import monitoring system, and we are trying for aluminium and copper to join the same. The next point is about compulsory registration order. For electronic goods, government has issued a compulsory registration order. So you can't just bring in electronic goods into this country. A public procurement policy for local content to promote domestic value addition. A lot has been done. Ministry of Power, Ministry of Railways has already issued orders, and the government is asking different ministries to issue these orders. Let's look at some other measures. Government has clearly said that where local capacity is lacking and we want to reduce import dependence, we must sign joint ventures with foreign manufacturers. A go-ahead has been given to the various trade and industry bodies. Now let me reel out some very important figures which I have got from Commerce Ministry. As a result of non-compliance on the public procurement policy, 27,000 crores worth of tenders have been cancelled or modified in the last few months. On the reciprocity clause, this has become mandatory in all global tenders to get access to government procurement, especially from China. I am informed by the Commerce Ministry that steel imports of nearly 12,000 crores have been saved as a result of this through the Ministry of Steel putting its efforts with the CPSUs. Then if you look at the amendment in the in the public procurement policy, we have started checking firms from operating from countries sharing land borders with India, and they will not be easily able to participate in government procurement. This again has never been done before. Technical regulations. You'll be surprised to know that technical regulations have been formulated for 150 product lines, and quality control orders have been formulated for 38 products by DPIIT. So this was also it was talked about but never done before. So these are very, very crucial things which have been, and as I mentioned, 38 products, QCOs have been done, another 20 have been tasked. This will enable Indian producers to match the best in global standards. Now, coming to the last point on this, as Mr. Gopalan said, Commerce Ministry has issued strict instructions for enforcement of rules of origin so that we don't get a lot of indiscriminate imports coming in. The FTA review has been given a real push by Mr. Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister. Mandatory technical standards are getting operationalized to regulate substandard imports. We will soon get a list of substandard imports which are going to be checked. I believe the process is on, and any day the Revenue Department may issue that list. This list will also include non-essential product imports, which we were indiscriminately importing for a large number of years. And finally, quantitative restrictions on identified products based on their domestic needs have also been operationalized. So if you look at these 10 non-tariff barriers, the first part of your question, these were never introduced with the kind of alacrity, with the kind of momentum, and with the kind of substance as has been done in the last few months in particular, and in the last few years in general.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gopalan, perhaps your view on both this part and whether you think this will actually finally create a globally competitive domestic industry?
Well, you see, the understanding now, as Prime Minister has said, is that we need to be self-reliant, and it does not mean it is self-centered. So he has thrown his weight behind globally competitive manufacturing to reduce import dependence, not a wall to be created to just prevent imports from coming in. Other steps outlined by Mr. Dadu are very important because other countries are doing it. If other countries are doing it, why should we not? We are not doing something which other countries have not done. But in addition to all these points, we need to certainly raise our productivity, our competitiveness in manufacturing, as well as in services. There are a number of issues which we are grappling with, issues relating to real estate reforms, retail, agriculture. Recently, some very significant steps have been taken, which are very good. Then we look at labor markets flexibility, with a safety net to be created for that particular purpose. Distribution reforms, especially power distribution reforms, power tariff reduction, monetizing government-owned assets, improving ease of doing business in the manner in which Niti Aayog has outlined the parameters for making doing business very easy. Then improving household savings in financial markets, financial assets, which is dipping quite a bit. Reducing the intermediation costs, the financing costs as I look at it. Then efficiencies in fiscal regime. There are a whole host of things at the macro level which are required to be done. And as Mr. Dadu mentioned, there are areas in which competitiveness can be improved in this country. auto and auto components, electronics and related goods, textiles, clothing and garments, chemicals, pharma, medical devices, and in capital goods. I think we can do quite a lot of, competitiveness can be increased in these areas, and we can really become one of the competitive manufacturing country in these particular products, provided they're able to address some of the issues that I outlined.
Thank you very much, sir. So as we come to the last 10 or 15 minutes of this webinar, I think we'll take some of the questions which have come from the people watching. Shumi, would you like to kick it off?
Yeah, I'll just start. So we have a question from Mr. Anton Arputanagyam. I think I can address this to you, Mr. Dadu, since you had spoken about the top 15 imported products. So there are as you had mentioned, right? There are a mix of raw materials. Some products are used for value addition, versus some are used directly for consumption and also for re-exports. Right. So, the question is that aren't we competitive in any of the sectors, right? From a local manufacturing point of view.
See, we are very competitive in terms of polishing raw diamonds. 90% of the world's raw diamonds are polished in India, and 75% of them in Surat itself. So this import of $12.6 billion is entirely for re-export once we polish them. If you look at gold, a large part of gold jewelry, again, we need raw gold. We don't produce gold in the country. In fact, I'd mentioned to the chairman that one of the things that we could look at for future is gold exploration or gold refining, because gold costs are going to go up to about $3,000 an ounce, from about $1,200 earlier to about $1,800 now, the way it's spiraling. So gold is another commodity. If we are able to tap in, we'll be able to do a huge import substitution. Look at silver. We're producing 600 tons and we have a target of 1,400 tons. If we produce 1,400 tons, this $2.4 billion will also come down substantially. So silver provides a great opportunity for us. Crude palm oil I mentioned. There is no reason why we can't have palm oil trees in this country. We have never searched for this, and therefore we are buying $3.6 billion worth of palm oil when we can ease. And Ramdev has said that 10 times I'll increase the production, I'll plant so many and this, that and the other. These are doable things. I understand LNG may not be possible, but why not mobile phone parts? Why not PCBs? Why not computer parts, solar cells? There are a large number of items where possibilities are staring us in the face. But we don't have a strategy of import substitution. If we do that, I'm sure many of these items, in the case of Vedanta, at least gold and silver and crude are distinct possibilities. We also import copper ores and concentrates to the tune of $1.2 billion. But I don't think we produce enough copper to be able to, import substitute this. If we are able to do that, then I think this again warrants an opportunity for Vedanta.
Thank you so much, sir. The second question comes from Ajay Gautam, and he asks, Mr. Gopalan, can we create a focus group team in government to reduce our import consumption?
Well, if it is a focus, I guess there are two kinds of things which must be done in government, which government knows how to do. One is focus group to look into certain products, get into make a deep dive to find out what are things which are required to be done to make those products or items competitive to produce in this country. It may require some issues relating to tariffs on raw materials, some support to be given in easing some of the restrictions on movements. There are a lot of things which a deep dive can indicate for a specific product. One can learn that. But overall, on increasing the competitiveness through various other measures which I just mentioned, these are all macro measures, macroeconomic measures, and obviously there should be a focus group at finance ministry level, which incorporates other ministries and certain good, knowledgeable people from outside who are at the receiving end of all this to see how we can do things to improve the competitiveness in providing services. For instance, let's say if you take the roads, I mean, your construction is not really picking up for a variety of reasons. One of them is the various clauses in the PPP, where you find that the advantage or the power shifts in favor of the government in these agreements as against the other side. And Mr. Kelkar had done a useful study in this government and indicated what all things to be done to ensure that PPPs become evenly balanced as far as power across the government as well as the other side. Now, those kind of things have to be driven, anchored and driven at some level to a focused group. So it's a combination of all this. It cannot be a focus group only for a particular product that is going to take it to achieve the competitiveness.
If I can chip in, Dheeraj, for a minute, the best example of what you're saying has happened in the recent COVID times. We were net importers of masks. We were net importers of all kinds of health-related equipment, including ventilators and oxygen cylinders, etc. Today, Indian manufacturers are clamoring to get the import curbs removed on all these items. In less than 6 months, we have become self-sufficient. N95 masks you take sanitizers, you take ventilators, you take oxygen cylinders, you take any item. Today we can export them. So if given an opportunity to make good money quickly, Indian entrepreneurs are equal to the task.
Yes, indeed. I think that will be studied as case study in the years to come, the way we've responded to the medical equipment need in the times of COVID. Shumi?
Yeah. So I think, again, as a follow-up question, Mr. Gopalan, Anubha Taneja is asking if you could elaborate a bit on the role of services sector for increasing competitiveness in manufacturing.
Well, on the services sector, let us say there are various computer-related services in artificial intelligence and IoT, and how access can be made available to them from various markets, make it open for technology to flow into these areas, and get into let us say legal services, where we can be the hub for legal services in the whole world. We have got excellent legal brains who, if they are able to access business from various other places, and they can also produce the kind of advice which is required for investment made by other countries into India. So that's another way in which the ability of the manufacturing firms can kind of go up and investments can flow into the country. These are some of the examples. We can keep on discussing some of them.
Thank you. So, and the final two questions, I'll give you both the questions and both of you can decide which one you would like to answer before we conclude. One is from Nilesh Pandey, and he says, are the labor laws in our country the major hurdle for foreign investors? Do you see that the changes made in the past few days are sufficient, or are we letting go of the opportunity from our hands? That's one question. And the second is from Shashwat Pachisia, who says countries like Vietnam are expanding rapidly, especially during these COVID times. What should India do to counter that? I think in many ways you have given some examples, but perhaps on the labor laws and then on Vietnam, quickly in a minute each, if you could give your views, either of you.
Okay, let me, Gopal sir, if it's okay with you, I'll take both the questions quickly and then you have more than 5 minutes. On labor laws, please understand we have the largest number of MNCs in this country, and they are operating from different parts of the country. While they may be having problems with local inspectors to some extent, but I advise Unilever, and I can tell you they have 27 factories and they don't have any issues. You have top MNCs operating in the country and nobody has ever bothered about these labor laws. Labor laws come into the picture when you get into remote areas of the country, and then the labor inspector starts bothering. I think 3 states have already announced that all labor laws will be suspended, and labor reforms are very much on the cards in the entire country. Therefore, I don't think labor laws can be a big impediment in foreign direct investment or foreign capital coming into the country. Although there are issues, I'm not sweeping them under the carpet, but I don't think that's a major issue. The major issue is more towards ease of doing business. Secondly, with respect to Vietnam, now Vietnam can produce a few things. It cannot match India's huge potential in a wide range of products. Vietnam can produce textiles, it can produce a few other things. It can't produce drugs like we do. We export $40 billion of drugs every year. Top of the line, vaccines we produce. So therefore, Vietnam, in comparison of Vietnam and India, is like comparing an elephant to an ant. They may have done very well in few sectors, but that's it. Don't expect them to, broad base industry on the lines of India or China. They are very good at a few things, and therefore they are making money on that. Same as Bangladesh. Bangladesh is restricted to textiles only. Ask them to produce drugs, ask them to produce electronic equipments. They are nowhere there. So therefore, my suggestion would be, while we talk about Vietnam, Philippines, Bangladesh, they have their severe limitations. India, to that extent, doesn't have limitations of that kind. What we need to do is ease of doing business in 2 sectors mainly, taxation and legality laws. These 2 sectors we are far behind, and that's what irks most of the multinational corporations. Cases don't get decided fast, taxation matters linger on for years, and there's no transparency, all kinds of issues. I have talked to several people while I was 7 years in commerce, and I found tax and laws are the 2 biggest impediments for foreign investors.
Mr. Gopalan, the last word to you for this session.
Yeah, the labor laws, the recent have come in 4 buckets, some of them including industrial relations, occupational safety, health, and the social safety net, and another thing. There were 4 areas in which the labor laws have recent legislations have taken place. Ask me, they are enough? They are not enough. They are a very, very good beginning as against what we were doing earlier. Now, this is a very, very good beginning. Increasing the number of foreclosures, minimum number of labor from 100 to 300. Now, getting the contract laborers getting the same kind of pay and other benefits. The social safety net for some of these people when they retire or when they have the whatever accretion they can do while they are in service. Ensuring that the place of functioning is made safe for them to work. And these are all very important issues. We need to see how these are implemented at the field level to ensure that it is evenly balanced between the industry, which the manufacturing, the management, as well as the labor. There is a possibility that we may go a little bit overboard in doing it in favor of one or the other, but we have to find balance if it evolves over a period of time. Possibly these are good beginnings, but as I mentioned, there are certain sticking points like model standing orders, which I find very surprising that in this age, these archaic things still continue. So there is a very good beginning which has been made, which we have been struggling to do in the last about 5-6 years after the NDA government came. But now we have an opportunity to push this across and try and implement them. But I am against some of the steps taken by some of the state governments on blanket ban for 3 years or some of the laws. I think those are all not the correct thing. I think we should not go to the other extreme in a hurry, because the interest of labor should also be borne in mind. As far as Vietnam, is concerned, Vietnam and Bangladesh are concerned, yes, they are good in a few items. It's not that they are going to supplant India in items which Mr. Dadu mentioned about, pharma items, medical devices, or capital goods. Maybe electronics, they are good. Auto components, they are reasonably well. But beyond that, textiles, and beyond that, not much can be said about them. But having said this, we should try and see what all things they have done to make the ecosystem more favorable for making manufacturing competitive. As I mentioned in my remarks there about the labor laws, the infrastructure costs reduction, the power cost reduction, the port export-import port cost reduction, the transportation cost to the ports for export purposes, the customs systems which they do to clear goods very fast and ensure that there is no backing or ships lying in the ports outside for 10 days, 20 days as we have in India. And these are and courts which are in Vietnam. I think the kind of judgment which are delivered, the time taken to deliver, and the levels of only one appeal or something, those kind of things which have been done in commercial cases, which we need to really learn. They are good things to learn. We need to learn and then try and implement them in this country, because we can't be found to be, let me say, a lot inferior to many of the countries on some of these issues, which foreign investors want to see they getting implemented in India. But we should not go overboard, as Bangladesh has done on the labor side. We should not go overboard on that. So we need to have a balance, but we need to see that what is really enabling the industries to set up in this country, what attractiveness which is required to be done. Those things have to be put in place, and without which I don't think the kind of shift which we are looking at, or looking at the FDI into the country, kind of things which we look at, that may not materialize. So that's where I will put it.
Thank you so much, Gopalan sir and Dadu sir. I think it was a highly productive session, knowledge sharing session for all of us, I think. And it's good to hear the positive side as well. I think we have all been reading up that maybe we've missed the bus yet again, but it's really heartening again, and encouraging to hear that India has still a long way to go. We have some hiccups, certain challenges that the industry, the government, all the stakeholders need to imbibe and take forward our country, and we shouldn't be left behind, or even not in the race with Vietnam and Bangladesh. So I think thank you for all of those encouraging notes and comments, and I would like to thank all of you for joining the session. Dadu sir, Gopalan sir, for giving us your insights, and doing all the details, answers to all of our questions. Thank you for your patience and answering all of our questions. And thank you again, the audience, Dheeraj sir for moderating this session, Roma ma'am for joining here, and all the senior leaders that have been here, but I can't see them. So thank you all, and all the participants for joining and making this an interactive session by asking questions as well. So thank you all.